The hyenas circled closer, their spotted bodies forming a tightening noose around the clearing. 18 of them. Kira counted each one as her muscles tensed beneath her golden fur. The baby zebra trembled against her belly, its tiny striped body hidden beneath her massive frame. Its heartbeat racing so fast, it felt like hummingbird wings against her skin. The lead hyena, a battle-scarred female the rangers called Scarface, for the deep gash running across her muzzle, let out a whooping laugh that echoed across the savannah. The sound made Kira's blood run cold, but she did not move. She could not move, because moving meant exposing the impossible creature she was protecting. Prey. Her prey. The meal her starving body desperately needed. The meal she would die defending. 3 weeks earlier, Kira had been a different lioness entirely. If you are new here, welcome to Eternal Bonds. We share stories that celebrate the extraordinary connections between animals and the humans who love them. If these tales touch your heart the way they touch ours, consider subscribing. Every new member of our community helps us bring more stories like this one to the world. The Masai Mara stretches across nearly 600 square miles of golden grassland, acacia trees, and winding rivers. During the Great Migration, over 2 million wildebeest, zebras, and gazelles cross its plains in an ancient dance of survival. It is a land of breathtaking beauty and brutal honesty, where life and death walk side by side beneath the endless African sky. And it was here, in this unforgiving paradise, that Kira had lived her entire 14 years. She had been born during a particularly harsh, dry season, the smallest of 4 cubs, so weak that her mother had nearly abandoned her in those first desperate days. But Kira survived. She grew stronger. She became one of the finest hunters in the Marsh Pride, known for her patience, her precision, and her unwavering loyalty to her family. She had given birth to 11 cubs over the years. She had watched 7 of them reach adulthood. She had taught them to hunt, to fight, to survive. And then, 3 weeks before the day she stood protecting a baby zebra from 18 hyenas, everything she had ever known was taken from her. It started with a failed hunt. The Marsh Pride had been tracking a buffalo herd for 2 days. The animals were massive, dangerous, but the Pride was hungry. 23 lions, including Kira, her sister Amani, and Amani's 3 young cubs, surrounded a lone bull that had separated from the group. The plan was simple. Kira would lead the charge, drawing the buffalo's attention, while the younger lionesses attacked from behind. But something went wrong. The buffalo turned faster than anyone expected. Its horns caught Amani in the chest before she could dodge, lifting her off the ground and throwing her nearly 10 feet through the air. Kira watched her sister land in a crumpled heap. She watched the light leave Amani's eyes before anyone could reach her. The pride scattered. The buffalo escaped, and Kira was left standing over her sister's body as the sun set blood red over the Mara. In lion society, failure carries consequences. The pride's dominant female, a massive lioness named Ziri, who had led the Marsh Pride for nearly a decade, blamed Kira for Amani's death. Kira had led the charge. Kira had positioned the others. Kira had failed. The judgment came 3 days later. Kira woke to find herself surrounded. Zuri stood at the front of the circle, her amber eyes cold and unforgiving. Behind her, the rest of the pride waited in silence. Even Kira's own daughter, a 4-year-old lioness named Tala, stood among them. The message was clear. Kira was no longer welcome. She tried to approach Tala, to touch her nose one last time to her daughter's face, but Zuri stepped between them with a low growl. The other lionesses joined in, their voices rising into a chorus of rejection. Kira backed away slowly, her heart shattering with each step. She walked for 3 days without stopping. She did not eat. She did not drink. She simply walked, putting as much distance as possible between herself and everything she had lost. Her body was still producing milk, still preparing to nurse the cubs she had been carrying when the exile came. She had been pregnant, nearly ready to give birth. The stress of the exile triggered a miscarriage on the second night. She buried the 3 tiny bodies beneath an acacia tree and continued walking. By the time she collapsed near a seasonal waterhole on the eastern edge of the Mara, Kira had given up. Her body was shutting down. Her milk was drying up. Her will to live had evaporated like morning dew under the African sun. She lay on her side in the tall grass, watching the clouds drift overhead, waiting for death to find her. But death had other plans. Dr. Thomas Okonkwo had been studying lions in the Masai Mara for 30 years. At 58 years old, he had documented more lion behavior than almost anyone alive. His research had been published in dozens of journals. His photographs had appeared in National Geographic. His name was synonymous with big cat conservation across East Africa. But none of that mattered anymore. 2 years earlier, Thomas's son Daniel had been killed in a car accident on the road between Nairobi and Narok. Daniel had been 26 years old, a veterinarian himself, following in his father's footsteps. He had been driving back from a conference when a truck crossed the center line. The collision killed Daniel instantly. Thomas had not been the same since. He still went through the motions of his research. He still drove out to the Mara every morning, still set up his cameras, still recorded his observations. But the passion that had once defined his work had vanished. He was a ghost of the man he used to be, going through the motions of a life that no longer felt like his own. His wife, Margaret, had begged him to take time off, to grieve properly, to talk to someone. But Thomas could not stop. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant drowning in a grief so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. So he kept working. And it was during one of these mechanical morning drives that he spotted Kira. She was lying in the grass near the waterhole, so still that Thomas initially thought she was dead. He pulled his Land Rover to a stop and raised his binoculars, expecting to see a carcass being picked over by vultures. Instead, he saw a rib cage rising and falling in shallow breaths. He saw eyes that were open but empty. He saw a creature that had given up. Thomas knew he should not interfere. Every researcher understood the importance of letting nature take its course. But something about the lioness made him pause. Perhaps it was the way she lay there, defeated but not dead. Perhaps it was the milk stains on her belly, evidence of a recent pregnancy that had clearly ended in tragedy. Perhaps it was simply that Thomas recognized in her eyes the same emptiness he saw in the mirror every morning. He did not approach her. He did not try to help, but he stayed. He parked his vehicle 50 meters away and watched her for the rest of the day, documenting her condition, noting her breathing rate, recording her lack of movement. When the sun began to set, he drove back to his research station and made a note in his journal. Lone female, approximately 14 years old, severe malnutrition, possible depression, unlikely to survive the week. He was wrong. The storm came on the 5th night of Kira's exile. It was not unusual for violent thunderstorms to sweep across the Mara during the rainy season. The clouds would build throughout the day, towering columns of white and grey that turned black by evening. Then the rain would come, sheets of water so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. Lightning would crack across the sky, thunder would shake the earth, and every creature in the savannah would seek shelter wherever they could find it. Kira had found a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock. It was not much, but it kept the worst of the rain off her back. She lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm rage around her, too weak to move, too broken to care. And then she heard it. A sound that cut through the thunder, a sound that made her ears perk up despite her exhaustion. A sound she had heard countless times in her life, but never quite like this. A zebra was screaming. Kira's instincts told her to stay hidden. She was in no condition to hunt. She could barely stand, let alone chase down prey. But something about the sound pulled at her. It was not the scream of a zebra being killed. It was something else. something she could not identify. She dragged herself out from beneath the rock and followed the sound. The rain was blinding, but Kira's nose led her forward. She smelled blood. She smelled fear. She smelled something else, something new and fragile and impossibly alive. She pushed through a wall of tall grass and emerged into a small clearing. The zebra mare was lying on her side, her striped body heaving with labored breaths. Blood pooled beneath her hindquarters, mixing with the rain and mud. She had been giving birth, Kira realized, but something had gone terribly wrong. The foal was out, a tiny striped body no bigger than a large dog, struggling to stand on legs that were still wet and wobbly. But the mare was dying. Kira could see it in her eyes. The lioness froze at the edge of the clearing. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to attack. Here was food, delivered to her like a gift from the savannah itself. A dying mare who could not fight back, a newborn foal who could not run. She could eat for a week on this much meat, but she did not move. The mare saw her. Their eyes met across the rain-soaked clearing. Kira expected fear. She expected the zebra to scream, to thrash, to use her last remaining strength trying to protect her baby. Instead, the mare did something that would haunt Kira for the rest of her life. She looked at her foal. Then she looked back at Kira, and in that look, Kira saw something she had never seen in prey before. Trust. The mare's head dropped back to the mud. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes glazed over, and then she was gone. Kira stood in the rain for a long time, staring at the body of the zebra who had looked at her with trust instead of fear. She did not understand what had happened. She did not understand why the mare had not tried to fight. She did not understand anything anymore. The foal whimpered. It was a tiny sound, barely audible over the rain. The baby zebra had managed to stand on its trembling legs, but it had nowhere to go. It nudged its mother's body with its nose, trying to get her to stand up. When she did not respond, the foal let out a cry of confusion and fear, and then it turned toward Kira. Any other predator would have seen an easy meal. A newborn zebra, alone and defenseless, walking directly toward its own death. But Kira saw something else. She saw a baby who had just lost its mother. She saw a creature as broken and alone as she was. She saw herself. The foal stumbled toward her through the mud. Kira did not move. She did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She simply stood there, rain pouring down her golden fur, watching as this impossible little creature approached the animal that should have killed it. The foal reached her. It pressed its tiny body against Kira's front leg. It was shivering, soaked to the bone, barely strong enough to stand. And then it did something that shattered every remaining piece of Kira's broken heart. It tried to nurse. The foal found the spot where Kira's belly met her hind leg and began to suckle. It was instinct, pure and simple. The baby was hungry. It needed milk. It had found something warm and alive, and it was trying to survive. Kira's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her milk had not completely dried up. The hormones that had been preparing her to nurse her own cubs were still circulating in her blood. And now, with this impossible creature pressed against her, her body did what it was designed to do. She let down her milk. The foal drank. Kira stood in the rain, a lioness nursing a baby zebra beside the body of its dead mother, and something inside her shifted. She did not understand it, she could not explain it, but in that moment, watching this tiny striped creature drinking from her body as if she were its mother, Kira made a choice. She would not let this baby die. Thomas found them the next morning. He had driven out to check on the lone lioness he had been monitoring, expecting to find her dead. Instead, he found her curled around a baby zebra, both of them asleep in a patch of sunlight that had broken through the clouds. He grabbed his camera with trembling hands. He raised it to his eye. He focused the lens, and then he paused. In 30 years of studying lions, Thomas had seen many remarkable things. He had seen coalitions of males bring down elephants. He had seen mothers defend their cubs against impossible odds. He had seen the brutal efficiency of a pride on the hunt and the tender moments of grooming that followed. But he had never seen anything like this. The lioness was wrapped around the baby zebra the way a mother lion wraps around her cubs. Her body was positioned to protect the foal from the wind, from the sun, from any threat that might approach. She was not restraining the zebra. She was not preparing to eat it. She was caring for it. Thomas lowered his camera. For the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than grief. He felt wonder. Over the next 3 days, Thomas documented every moment of the impossible relationship between Kira and the baby zebra. He silently named Ziri, which meant moonlight in Swahili. The name seemed fitting. The foal's stripes were unusually white, almost luminous in the morning sun. He watched Kira carry the foal to water sources, walking slowly so Ziri's weak legs could keep up. He watched her position herself between the baby and potential threats, standing guard while Ziri slept. He watched her groom the foal with her rough tongue, cleaning the mud from its stripes with the same care she would have shown her own cubs. But he also watched the challenges. Kira was still weak. She had not eaten properly in nearly 2 weeks. Nursing Ziri was draining what little energy she had left. Thomas could see her ribs growing more prominent each day. He could see her movements becoming slower, more deliberate. She was killing herself to keep this baby alive, and the savannah had noticed. On the morning of the 4th day, Thomas arrived at his observation point to find Kira on her feet, her ears flattened against her skull, her lips pulled back to reveal her teeth. Ziri was pressed against her belly, hidden beneath the curve of her body. A clan of hyenas had found them. They came from the north, following the scent of fresh milk and vulnerable prey. 18 hyenas, led by the massive female Thomas had named Scarface years earlier, when he documented the wound that nearly killed her. They spread out around the clearing in a loose circle, their bodies low, their eyes fixed on the impossible pair in the center. Scarface let out her signature whooping call. The sound was answered by the rest of the clan. They were communicating, coordinating, preparing for the attack. Thomas reached for his radio. Every instinct told him to call for help, to alert the rangers, to do something to save the lioness and her impossible baby. But his hand stopped before it touched the device. He had spent 30 years studying the laws of the wild. He knew that nature did not care about miracles. He knew that the strong survived and the weak perished, and that interfering with that process could cause more harm than good. He had watched countless animals die over the years. He had never intervened. But this was different. This was a lioness who had chosen compassion over instinct. This was a baby who had been given a second chance at life by the last creature that should have offered it. This was something he had never seen before and might never see again. His hand hovered over the radio. In the clearing below, Kira made her decision first. She did not run. She did not try to fight. She did something that made Thomas's heart stop in his chest. She lay down. She pressed her body flat against the earth, covering Ziri completely beneath her belly. The foal was invisible now, hidden beneath nearly 300 pounds of protective lioness. Kira's head was up, her eyes moving from hyena to hyena, watching their approach with a calm that seemed almost supernatural. The message was clear. If the hyenas wanted the baby, they would have to go through her first. Scarface moved closer. The alpha hyena's lips curled back, revealing teeth that had crushed bones and torn flesh countless times before. She let out another whooping call, and the rest of the clan closed in. 18 hyenas, 1 injured lioness, 1 impossible choice. Thomas watched through his binoculars as Kira prepared to die, defending prey. And in that moment, something changed inside him. The grief that had frozen his heart for 2 years began to crack. The emptiness that had consumed him since Daniel's death began to fill with something new. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something close. He was witnessing a creature who had lost everything make the ultimate sacrifice for something she had no biological reason to love. He was watching a mother, broken and exiled and starving, choose death over abandoning a baby that was not even her own species. And he realized, with a clarity that took his breath away, that if Kira could find something worth dying for after losing everything, then perhaps he could find something worth living for. The hyenas charged, and Kira stood up. Kira rose to her full height with a roar that shook the morning air. It was not the roar of a healthy lioness. It was thinner, weaker, strained by days of starvation and grief. But it was enough to make the charging hyenas hesitate. They slowed their advance, spreading out in a wider arc, reassessing the threat. Scarface barked a command, and the clan settled into a patient circle. They could wait. They had numbers on their side. Sooner or later, the lioness would tire. Kira knew this too. She stood over Ziri, her body a shield between the foal and 18 sets of hungry jaws. Her muscles were trembling. Her legs felt like they might collapse at any moment, but she held her ground, her amber eyes moving constantly, tracking every hyena, calculating every threat. Ziri pressed closer against her belly, the foal's entire body shaking with terror. The baby had never seen a hyena before. It did not understand the danger. All it knew was that the warm, safe creature protecting it was scared, and that made everything terrifying. The standoff lasted nearly an hour. The hyenas would advance, testing Kira's defenses. She would lunge at them, snapping her jaws, forcing them back. Then they would circle, looking for weakness, looking for an opening. And the cycle would repeat. Lunge, retreat, circle, lunge, retreat, circle. Thomas watched from his vehicle, his hand still hovering over the radio. He had called for backup 20 minutes into the standoff, alerting the local rangers to the situation, but he knew they were too far away. By the time they arrived, it would be over, one way or another. The breaking point came when Scarface decided to test Kira's commitment. The alpha hyena charged directly at the lioness, not from the side like the others, but straight on. It was a dominance display, a message to her clan that she was not afraid. Kira met the charge with a swipe of her massive paw, claws extended, catching Scarface across the shoulder and drawing blood. The hyena yelped and retreated, but the damage was done. The effort of the strike had cost Kira nearly everything she had left. Her legs buckled. She caught herself before she fell, but barely. The hyenas saw it. They smelled weakness in the air. They began to close in again, more confidently this time. Kira let out another roar, but it was weaker than before. She could feel her body failing. She could feel her heart racing too fast, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming for rest. She had minutes left, maybe less. She looked down at Ziri. The foal looked back up at her with eyes full of trust. Kira made a decision. If she was going to die, she would die fighting. She would take as many of these laughing demons with her as she could. She would give Ziri every possible second to escape, to run, to survive. She gathered the last of her strength, and then she heard something impossible. A roar answered hers from the east, then another from the south, then a third from the north. The hyenas froze. Their ears swiveled toward the new sounds. Their confident postures shifted into something closer to alarm. 3 lionesses emerged from the tall grass. They were young, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, their bodies sleek and powerful and unmarked by battle. They moved with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters, spreading out to form a triangle around the hyena clan. Their golden eyes were fixed on Scarface with an intensity that made the alpha hyena take a step backward. Kira recognized them instantly. They were from the Marsh Pride. They were young lionesses who had been barely more than cubs when Kira was exiled. She did not know their names. She had not spent time with them. They had no reason to help her, but they were here. The lead lioness, a tawny female with a distinctive notch in her left ear, let out a low growl that rumbled across the clearing. The message was clear. The odds had changed. Scarface understood mathematics. 18 hyenas against one weakened lioness was a guaranteed victory. 18 hyenas against 4 healthy lionesses was a massacre waiting to happen. The alpha hyena let out a series of barks, and her clan began to retreat, backing away slowly, their eyes never leaving the lions surrounding them. Within minutes, they were gone. Kira's legs gave out. She collapsed onto her side, her breathing ragged, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ziri immediately pressed against her, licking her face with a rough little tongue, making small sounds of distress. The foal did not understand what had just happened. It only knew that its protector was hurt. The 3 young lionesses approached cautiously. The one with the notched ear came closest. She sniffed Kira's face, then turned her attention to Ziri. The foal flinched away, pressing harder against Kira's belly. But the young lioness did not attack. She simply studied the impossible pair with curious eyes, her head tilted slightly to one side. Then she did something that made Thomas gasp. She lay down next to Kira. The other 2 lionesses followed, positioning themselves in a protective circle around the exhausted older lioness and her zebra baby. They had formed a defensive perimeter, just as pride lionesses do when protecting young cubs. They were treating Kira and Ziri as family. Thomas lowered his binoculars with shaking hands. He had just witnessed something that defied everything he thought he knew about lion behavior. These young lionesses had no biological imperative to help Kira. She was exiled, rejected, no longer part of their social group. And the zebra was food, pure and simple. There was no evolutionary advantage to protecting it. Yet here they were. He picked up his radio. His backup was still 20 minutes out, but it did not matter anymore. The immediate threat had passed. He could report what he had seen, document it properly, add it to the scientific record. But first, he simply sat in his vehicle and watched. The sun climbed higher over the Mara. The lionesses rested in their protective circle. Ziri nursed from Kira, its tiny tail flicking with contentment, and for a long moment the savannah was at peace. Thomas thought about Daniel. He thought about the phone call that had shattered his world. He thought about the funeral, the empty chair at the dinner table, the bedroom that Margaret could not bring herself to enter. He thought about all the times he had wished he could go back, change something, save his son the way those young lionesses had just saved Kira, but he could not. What he could do was witness this miracle. What he could do was document it, share it, let the world know that even in the brutal arithmetic of survival, there was still room for compassion. There was still room for choices that made no sense. There was still room for love. Over the following weeks, Thomas became a regular observer of what he privately called the impossible family. The 3 young lionesses, whom he eventually learned were named Nadia, Asha, and Penda, had made a choice that went against everything their pride had taught them. They had chosen Kira, they had chosen Ziri, and they had chosen to remain outcasts themselves, rather than return to the marsh pride without the exiled lioness they had saved. Thomas pieced together the story from his observations and from conversations with other researchers who had been tracking the marsh pride. Nadia, the lioness with the notched ear, had been close to Kira's daughter Tala before the exile. When the pride cast Kira out, Nadia had been disturbed by the injustice of it. The failed hunt that killed Amani had not been Kira's fault. The buffalo had simply been faster than anyone expected. Blaming Kira was politics, not justice. Asha and Penda were Nadia's sisters. Where she went, they followed. The 3 of them had been tracking Kira since her exile, staying far enough away that the older lioness did not notice, but close enough to intervene if she needed help. They had watched her deteriorate. They had watched her find Ziri. They had watched her nurse a baby zebra and had struggled to understand what they were seeing. And when the hyenas came, they had made their choice. Now they were a pride of their own. 4 lionesses and 1 baby zebra, surviving together on the margins of the Mara. Thomas documented everything. He recorded how Kira taught Ziri to follow the pride when they moved to new hunting grounds. The foal had learned to walk at Kira's pace, staying close to her flank, matching her steps with an uncanny precision. When the lionesses hunted, Ziri would wait at a safe distance, grazing on whatever grass was available until Kira returned to collect it. He documented the nursing sessions, which continued long after they should have ended. Kira's milk production had stabilized, her body somehow adapting to the demands of feeding an animal that should have been weaned weeks ago. Ziri grew stronger every day, its stripes becoming more pronounced, its legs more steady. He documented the way the young lionesses interacted with the foal. Nadia seemed genuinely fond of Ziri, often grooming the baby with her rough tongue the way she would groom a lion cub. Asha and Penda were more distant, but never aggressive. They tolerated the strange creature in their midst with a patience that surprised even Thomas. And he documented his own transformation. For the first time in 2 years, Thomas found himself looking forward to his mornings. He would wake before dawn, eager to get out to his observation point, eager to see what new behavior the impossible family would display. He started taking notes again, real notes, the kind of detailed observations that had defined his career before Daniel's death. Margaret noticed the change. She said nothing at first, simply watching her husband return from the field with something other than emptiness in his eyes. Then, one evening, she asked him about it. Thomas told her about Kira. He told her about Ziri. He told her about the young lionesses who had defied their own pride to protect an exile and her impossible baby. He told her everything, his voice breaking several times as he described what he had witnessed. When he finished, Margaret was crying. She reached across the table and took his hand. "We should go," she said. "Together. I want to see them." The next morning, Thomas brought his wife to the Mara. They found the impossible family near a seasonal waterhole, resting in the shade of an acacia tree. Kira was lying on her side, Ziri pressed against her belly, the 3 young lionesses arranged in their usual protective formation around them. Margaret raised the binoculars Thomas handed her. For a long moment, she did not speak. Then softly she said, "She loves that baby the way I love Daniel." Thomas nodded. "That is what I have been trying to understand," he said. "There is no evolutionary advantage to what she is doing. There is no survival benefit. She is risking her life every day to protect something that should be food, and she does it anyway." Margaret lowered the binoculars. "Because love does not care about evolution," she said. "Love does not care about logic. Love simply is." Thomas thought about that for a long time. As the weeks passed, the impossible family faced challenges that tested the strength of their unlikely bond. Food was the most pressing issue. 4 lionesses could hunt effectively, but they could not hunt with a baby zebra in tow. Ziri's presence made stalking impossible. The foal's stripes stood out against the golden grass, and its movements were unpredictable. Prey would spot them from hundreds of meters away and flee long before the lionesses could get close. The solution came from Nadia. The young lioness developed a system. When the pride needed to hunt, Kira would take Ziri to a predetermined location, usually a dense thicket or a rocky outcropping where the foal could hide. The 3 younger lionesses would then hunt without the distraction of the zebra, returning to collect Kira and Ziri once they had made a kill. It was not perfect. Kira hated leaving Ziri alone, even for an hour. The foal would cry when she left, its high-pitched whinnies echoing across the savannah. But it worked. The pride began to gain weight. The gaunt look that had haunted Kira's face began to fade. The second challenge was more complicated. Ziri was growing. The tiny foal that had fit beneath Kira's belly was becoming a young zebra. Its legs were longer, its body was heavier, its stripes were sharper, more defined, and with growth came instincts that had nothing to do with lions. Thomas noticed it first during one of his observation sessions. Ziri had been grazing near the waterhole when a small group of zebras appeared on the horizon. The foal's head snapped up, its ears pricked forward. Its entire body went still, watching the distant striped shapes with an intensity that Thomas had never seen before. For nearly 10 minutes, Ziri did not move. It simply stared at the zebras, something deep and ancient stirring in its blood. Then Kira approached, nudging the foal with her nose, and the spell was broken. Ziri turned away from the distant zebras and followed its lion mother back to the shade. But Thomas had seen the longing in the foal's eyes. He knew it was only a matter of time. The third challenge came from an unexpected direction. Word of the impossible family had spread throughout the research community. Thomas's observations had been shared with colleagues who had shared them with journalists, who had shared them with the world. Within weeks, the story of the exiled lioness who had adopted a baby zebra had become international news. Tourists began arriving at the Mara specifically to see Kira and Ziri. Safari vehicles would line up at the edges of their territory, cameras clicking, voices murmuring with wonder. The impossible family became a sensation, their images appearing on magazine covers and wildlife documentaries. Most of the attention was harmless. The tourists kept their distance, and the lionesses learned to ignore the vehicles. But some visitors were not content with observation. A photographer from a European magazine decided that he needed closer shots. He convinced his guide to drive into the impossible family's territory during a rest period, approaching within 30 meters of the sleeping pride. Kira woke to find the vehicle bearing down on her, its occupant leaning out with a camera that looked like a weapon. She reacted on instinct. Her roar sent the photographer scrambling back into his seat. His guide reversed the vehicle so quickly that it nearly tipped over. They fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of dust and a lioness who spent the next 3 hours on high alert, pacing the perimeter of her family's resting spot. Thomas was furious. He filed a formal complaint with the park authorities, documenting the incident and demanding stricter enforcement of approach distances. He gave interviews condemning irresponsible wildlife tourism. He even considered ending his own observation program to protect the impossible family from the attention he had helped attract. But Kira adapted. She always adapted. The lioness, who had survived exile, starvation, and 18 hyenas, was not going to let some tourists with cameras destroy what she had built. She simply moved her family deeper into the reserve, to areas that were harder for vehicles to access. She became more vigilant, more cautious, more protective, and she kept loving Ziri. That was what struck Thomas most as the weeks turned into months. Despite everything, despite the challenges and the dangers and the impossibility of what she was doing, Kira never wavered in her devotion to the zebra she had adopted. He watched her groom Ziri every evening, her rough tongue cleaning the dust from the foal's stripes. He watched her position herself between Ziri and any perceived threat, ready to fight anything that endangered her baby. He watched her nudge the growing zebra awake each morning, checking that it had survived another night. It was love, pure and simple. The kind of love that Thomas had felt for Daniel, the kind of love that Margaret still felt for their lost son. One evening, as Thomas was packing up his equipment, he made a note in his journal that surprised even him. He wrote, "Kira has taught me something I thought I had forgotten, that love is not diminished by loss, that caring for something does not make us weaker, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let our hearts break open and love anyway." He closed the journal. Tomorrow, he would come back. Tomorrow, he would watch the impossible family again. Tomorrow, he would continue documenting this miracle, but tonight, he would go home to Margaret. Tonight, he would tell her about Daniel. Tonight, He would let himself grieve, finally, completely, the way he should have grieved 2 years ago. And then, maybe, he would start to heal, the way Kira had healed, the way love heals us all. 3 months after the hyena attack, Kira woke to an empty space beside her. She lifted her head, her amber eyes scanning the pre-dawn darkness. Nadia, Asha, and Penda were still asleep in their usual positions, forming a loose semicircle around her resting spot. But Ziri was gone. Kira was on her feet instantly, her heart pounding. She sniffed the air, catching the familiar scent of her adopted child. The trail led east, toward the open grassland, where zebra herds often grazed during the early morning hours. She followed. The sun was just beginning to paint the horizon orange when Kira found Ziri. The young zebra was standing on a small rise, its body silhouetted against the dawn light, its head turned towards something in the distance, a herd of zebras. There were perhaps 40 of them, grazing peacefully in the golden grass. Maris and stallions and foals of various ages, their stripes creating a hypnotic pattern of black and white against the tawny savanna. They were beautiful, they were wild, they were everything that Ziri was supposed to be. Kira approached slowly. Ziri did not run to her the way it usually did. The young zebra remained motionless, its eyes fixed on the distant herd, its ears straining toward the sounds of its own kind. Kira could see the longing in every line of its body. She could feel the pull of instinct, the ancient call of blood and belonging, drawing her child toward a life that did not include a lion mother. She stopped a few meters away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ziri turned and walked back to Kira, pressing its face against her shoulder the way it had done since the night they met. The young zebra made a soft sound, somewhere between a whinny and a sigh, and they walked back to the pride together. But Kira knew. She had seen the look in Ziri's eyes. She had felt the hesitation before the choice. She had watched her child stand on the edge of another life and want it. It was only a matter of time. Thomas documented everything. He had been following the impossible family for 3 months now, recording hundreds of hours of observations. His notes filled multiple journals. His photographs had been published in scientific papers. His story had touched millions of people around the world. But nothing he had witnessed prepared him for what happened next. It started with another vehicle, not tourists this time. This was an official Park Service truck, marked with the insignia of the Kenya Wildlife Service. It pulled up to Thomas's observation point one morning, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out. "Dr. Okonkwo," the senior officer said, "we need to talk." Thomas's stomach dropped. The officers explained the situation in clipped professional tones. The impossible family had become too famous. The international attention had created pressure on the Kenyan government to intervene. Animal welfare organizations were demanding that Ziri be removed from the lions and placed in a proper sanctuary. Scientists were debating whether the arrangement was harmful to the zebra's psychological development. Politicians were worried about the optics of appearing to condone predators raising prey. In short, they wanted to separate Kira and Ziri. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. "No," he said. The officers exchanged glances. "Dr. Okonkwo," the senior one said, "this is not a request. We have orders to assess the situation and make a recommendation. If we determine that the zebra is at risk, we have the authority to remove it." "Remove it to where?" Thomas demanded. "A wildlife sanctuary near Nairobi. The zebra would be cared for. It would be safe." "Safe," Thomas repeated. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. "Safe from the lion who saved its life. Safe from the mother who nursed it through impossible odds. Safe from the only family it has ever known." The officers did not respond. Thomas spent the next week fighting. He called every contact he had in the conservation community. He gave interviews to international media outlets, pleading the case for the impossible family. He wrote letters to government officials, scientific journals, wildlife organizations. He made arguments about the scientific value of continued observation, about the precedent that forced separation would set, about the simple moral wrong of tearing apart a bond that had defied every expectation. Some people listened, many did not. The pressure continued to build. More officials arrived at the Mara, more assessments were conducted, more meetings were held in air-conditioned offices far from the savannah where Kira groomed Ziri every evening. Thomas felt helpless. He knew that feeling well. He had felt it the night Daniel died, when the phone rang and a stranger's voice told him that his son was gone. He had felt it in the months that followed, as grief consumed him, and he could do nothing to stop it. But this time was different. This time, he could fight. The decision came on a Tuesday morning. Thomas was at his observation point when the Park Service truck returned. This time, it was followed by a second vehicle, a van with a specialized animal containment unit. He watched them approach with a growing sense of dread. The senior officer stepped out. "Dr. Okonkwo," he said, "we have received authorization to relocate the zebra." Thomas did not trust himself to speak. The officer continued, "We will sedate the animal and transport it to the Nairobi sanctuary. The lions will be left undisturbed. I understand this is difficult, but we believe it is the best outcome for all involved." "Best outcome," Thomas said. His voice was hoarse. "You are going to tear a baby away from its mother and call it the best outcome." "The zebra is not the lioness's baby," the officer said. "We need to remember that. Tell that to Kira." The operation was scheduled for the following morning. Thomas spent that night in his vehicle, watching the impossible family sleep. Kira was curled around Ziri as always, the young zebra's striped body pressed against her golden fur. Nadia, Asha, and Penda formed their protective semicircle, unaware that it would be their last night together. He thought about intervening. He could drive into the clearing, wake the lions, scatter them to the far corners of the reserve where the Park Service would never find them. He could buy them time, maybe days, maybe weeks. He could give them a chance to disappear, but he knew it would not work. The Park Service had resources. They had helicopters, tracking equipment, trained personnel. They would find Ziri eventually, and when they did, Thomas would be arrested for obstruction, and the impossible family would lose their most vocal defender. So he sat in his vehicle and watched, and he prayed for a miracle. The miracle came with the sunrise. Thomas was dozing in his seat when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the savannah, a sound that made his eyes snap open and his heart begin to race. Zebras, hundreds of them. They appeared over the ridge to the east, a massive herd moving across the grassland in the golden light of early morning. Their hooves drummed against the earth like thunder. Their stripes created rivers of black and white that flowed across the landscape. It was the Great Migration, the annual movement of millions of animals across the Serengeti and Mara ecosystem. And they were heading directly toward the impossible family. Kira was awake instantly. She rose to her feet, her body tense, her eyes tracking the approaching herd. Behind her, the three young lionesses scrambled into defensive positions. They had hunted zebras before. They knew how dangerous a stampede could be, but Ziri did not move. The young zebra stood frozen, its head turned toward the approaching herd, its entire body trembling. Thomas could see the conflict in its posture. The instinct to flee toward its own kind warred with the bond that held it to its lion family. The herd came closer. They were perhaps 200 meters away when something remarkable happened. A lone zebra mare separated from the group. She was older, her muzzle graying, her stripes faded by years of sun and wind. She approached the impossible family slowly, carefully, her eyes fixed on Ziri. Kira let out a warning growl. The mare stopped. She did not flee. She did not approach. She simply stood there, watching Ziri with an intensity that Thomas could feel even from his distant observation point. And then she called. It was a sound Thomas had heard countless times during his years in the Mara. The distinctive bark of a zebra mare, a vocalization used to locate family members, to call foals back to the group, to maintain the bonds that held herds together. Ziri answered. The young zebra let out a cry of its own, high and wavering, the sound of a child calling to a parent it had never met. Then it took a step toward the mare, then another. Then it stopped. Thomas held his breath. Ziri turned back to look at Kira. The lioness had not moved. She stood where she had been standing since the herd appeared, her amber eyes fixed on the zebra she had saved, nursed, protected, loved. Her body was trembling. Her ears were flat against her skull, but she did not approach. She did not try to stop Ziri from leaving. She simply waited. The moment stretched into eternity, and then Kira did something that shattered Thomas's heart. She turned around. The lioness turned her back on Ziri and walked away. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. She did not look back. She did not make a sound. She simply walked, heading toward the rocky outcropping where the pride sometimes rested during the heat of the day. Nadia, Asha, and Penda followed, their heads hanging low. They were letting Ziri go. They were giving the young zebra the freedom to choose. Thomas watched through tear-blurred eyes as Ziri stood alone in the clearing. The zebra mare was still waiting, her call still echoing across the savannah. The herd had slowed, hundreds of striped bodies milling on the horizon, waiting to see what would happen. Ziri took another step toward the mare, then another. Then it ran. Not toward the mare, not toward the herd, toward Kira. The young zebra galloped across the clearing and caught up with the retreating lioness. It pressed its face against Kira's flank the way it had done since it was a newborn, making soft sounds of distress, refusing to let her leave. Kira stopped. She turned, and she did something that Thomas would never forget. She licked Ziri's face. Slowly, gently, with all the tenderness of a mother saying goodbye, Kira cleaned the dust from her child's stripes. She nuzzled the young zebra's neck. She breathed in the scent that she had known since that stormy night 3 months ago. Then she nudged Ziri toward the waiting mare. Go, her body seemed to say. Go where you belong. Go live the life you were meant to live. Ziri hesitated. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then the young zebra walked toward the mare. The older zebra approached slowly, sniffing Ziri's face, examining this strange creature that smelled like lions but looked like family. Thomas watched as the mare began to groom Ziri, her movements slow and careful, introducing the young zebra to the rituals of its own kind. The herd had stopped completely now. Hundreds of zebras watched as the impossible reunion unfolded. And then, as naturally as breathing, Ziri was absorbed into the group. The herd began to move again, slowly at first, then faster, the great river of stripes flowing across the landscape. Ziri moved with them, its young legs finding the rhythm of the migration, its body surrounded by others who looked just like it. But once, just before the herd disappeared over the ridge, Ziri stopped. The young zebra turned back. Kira was still standing where Ziri had left her, a golden statue against the green grass. The lioness raised her head, her amber eyes meeting the dark eyes of the child she had saved. They looked at each other across the widening distance. And then, Ziri was gone. Thomas found Kira that evening. She was lying alone on the rocky outcropping, staring out at the savannah where the migration had passed. Nadia, Asha and Penda were nearby, giving her space, seeming to understand that their leader needed time to grieve. Thomas parked his vehicle and stepped out. He had never approached the lioness on foot before. It was dangerous, foolish, everything his training told him not to do. But something compelled him forward. He stopped 20 meters away. Kira looked at him. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The man who had lost a son, the lioness who had just released a daughter, two broken creatures who had found something worth loving and had chosen to let it go. "I understand," Thomas said softly. He knew she could not understand his words. But maybe she could understand his tone, his tears, his grief. "I understand why you did it, why you let her go, why you turned your back so she could leave." Kira continued to watch him. "Love is not about holding on," Thomas said. "It is about giving the ones we love the freedom to become who they are meant to be, even when it destroys us, even when it breaks our hearts." He wiped his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for teaching me that." The Park Service vehicles arrived 30 minutes later. Thomas watched them approach with a strange calm. He knew what they would find: an empty clearing, no zebra, no impossible bond to separate. Just a pride of lions resting in the evening light. The senior officer stepped out of his truck, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Where is the zebra?" he asked. Thomas pointed toward the horizon, where the last dust of the migration was settling. "Gone," he said. "She let it go." "What do you mean, she let it go?" Thomas smiled. "The lioness raised the zebra for 3 months," he said. "She protected it, nursed it, loved it. And when the time came, she turned her back so her child could leave." The officer stared at him. "That is impossible." Thomas nodded. "Yes," he said, "it was." 6 months later, Thomas published his paper. It was the most comprehensive study of interspecies adoption ever documented. It included hundreds of observations, thousands of photographs, and detailed analysis of behavior that had never been recorded before. It challenged assumptions about predator and prey relationships. It raised questions about animal consciousness, emotional capacity, and the nature of love. But the paper was not the reason Thomas was standing on this hillside at dawn. He was here because his guide had radioed him at midnight with a message that made his heart stop. She came back. The zebra came back. Thomas had driven through the darkness, navigating the rough roads of the Mara by memory, arriving at the coordinates just as the sun began to rise, and now he saw her. Ziri was standing at the edge of a small herd of zebras, her stripes unmistakable even after 6 months. She was larger now, her body filled out by the abundant grazing of the migration routes. She looked healthy, strong, wild. But she was not alone. Pressed against her flank was a tiny foal. Ziri had become a mother, and she had brought her baby to meet Kira. The lioness emerged from the tall grass like a ghost. Kira was older now, her muzzle graying, her movements slower than they had been a year ago, but her amber eyes were bright as she approached the impossible creature she had raised. Ziri did not run. She stood her ground as Kira came closer, her body positioned to protect her foal, but her stance welcoming, not defensive. The baby zebra peeked out from behind its mother, curious about the golden predator that should have been terrifying. Kira stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ziri lowered her head and touched her nose to Kira's face. Thomas watched through his binoculars, tears streaming down his cheeks. He watched as Kira nuzzled the zebra she had saved. He watched as Ziri introduced her baby to the grandmother who was not supposed to exist. He watched as the foal, cautious but unafraid, approached the lioness and sniffed her golden fur. He watched love transcend every boundary that nature had tried to impose. This is the part where I am supposed to ask you to like and subscribe. And I will, because your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. But first, I want to ask you something. Have you ever loved something so much that you had to let it go? Have you ever held on when every instinct told you to hold tighter and then opened your hands anyway? Have you ever watched someone you raised walk away toward a life that did not include you? If you have, then you understand what Kira felt that morning. And if you have not, then I hope this story helps you understand that love is not measured by how tightly we hold. It is measured by our willingness to release, to trust, to believe that the bonds we have built will survive even distance, even time, even the impossible boundaries between species. Kira taught me that. A lioness who should have eaten a baby zebra, a mother who nursed a child that was not her own, a creature who turned her back so her daughter could be free, and then welcomed her home when she returned. If you were moved by this story, leave a comment telling me about your own experience with letting go. Tell me about the love that changed you. Tell me about the bonds that survived despite everything. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to Eternal Bonds. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, because there are more miracles out there, and together we are going to find them. Kira is still alive as far as we know. She still leads her small pride of outcasts, still hunts the margins of the Mara, still watches the migration pass by each year. And sometimes, according to the rangers who patrol her territory, she is visited by a zebra mare with unusually white stripes. They stand together for a while, then they part, and the savannah continues, as it always has, with its laws of survival and its exceptions of love. Dr. Thomas Okonkwo still visits the Mara regularly. He and Margaret go together now. They bring flowers for Daniel's memorial, a small marker they placed near the waterhole where Thomas first saw Kira, and they watch. They watch the impossible happen. They watch love win. And they remember that some bonds are stronger than blood, stronger than instinct, stronger than every law that says they should not exist. This is Eternal Bonds. Thank you for being part of our family. We will see you in the next one.